They say the wind never truly stops blowing across the Mongolian plains, only changes its direction. If you listen closely, you can almost hear it carrying the whispers of an empire that once ruled from the Pacific Ocean to the gates of Europe. It begins here, on the endless steppe, beneath a sky so vast it feels like eternity itself. The air smells of horse sweat and frozen grass, and in the distance, a child is born, one who would be called Temüjin, but whom the world would remember as Genghis Khan. His story does not begin in palaces or temples, but in the harsh embrace of nature, where survival itself was a daily conquest. The year was around 1162, though some say it might have been earlier. Others, later time bends easily when legends are involved. Temüjin's father, Yasuge, was a respected chieftain, but power on the steppe was fragile, a shifting game of alliances and revenge. His mother, Ellen, once taken by force from another tribe, embodied the endurance and silence that would define her son's world. When Temüjin was still a boy, his father was poisoned by rivals, leaving the family abandoned, cast out by those who once swore loyalty. The child who would unite nations began as an outcast, his family scavenging roots and wild berries, his hands freezing around empty air. Some say this hardship broke him. Others say it shaped something unbreakable inside him. Imagine the loneliness of that horizon, the winds clawing at a boy too young to hate, but old enough to understand betrayal. The great empire of the future was not born from wealth or power, but from hunger, exile, and the sheer will to survive. In these early years, Temüjin learned the truth that would guide every decision he made, that loyalty was earned, not inherited, and that the world was divided not by borders, but by strength and fear. Sit back, breathe in that cold air, and picture himskin roar from the wind, eyes burning with quiet fury. Somewhere in the distance, the hooves of fate were already thundering toward him. The boy who had nothing was destined to take everything, and this is where the empire of the steppe first began to breathe. When Temüjin's father died, the ties that once held his family to the tribe unraveled like frayed rope in a storm. They were abandoned, left to die in the vast emptiness of the steppe. The winds grew crueler, the nights longer, and every dawn carried the sound of hunger echoing in the silence. His mother, Ellen, gathered what strength she had, teaching her children to survive on what the land allowed. They hunted small animals, dug for roots, and drank from rivers that froze over in winter. It was a life stripped of comfort and full of cold lessons. Yet it was here, in the loneliness of exile, that Temüjin began to understand the nature of strength, not the strength of armies, but the strength of endurance, of never yielding when all hope seems lost. Some historians say he must have been no older than 9 when he began to hunt, to lead, to think like a survivor. Others believe it was in this silence that he learned his first law, that mercy was a luxury the weak could not afford. Once, when a rival boy stole food from his family, Temüjin caught him and exacted a brutal revenge, a small but haunting glimpse into the man he would become. He was not cruel for pleasure, he was cruel to remember. Each act of defiance was a promise to himself that he would never be powerless again. The tribes around him lived by shifting alliances, betraying each other for horses or water. But Temüjin began to see beyond the chaos. He believed that unity could be forged through loyalty stronger than blood, through trust born from hardship. The Mongol steppe was a world that swallowed the weak and crowned the relentless. And Temüjin was already carving his place among the relentless. At night, he would look toward the horizon, where the stars trembled above the plains, and wonder if his father's spirit was still watching. Some say he made a vow then to restore his family's honor, to bring order where there was none. In the endless sea of grass, the boy who once starved began to dream not of survival, but of destiny. And destiny, as it turns out, had been waiting for him all along. As Temüjin grew older, the steppe hardened him, but fate was not yet done testing his resolve. In his early teens, he was captured by the Temüjin, a rival clan that had once been allied with his father. They saw in him the potential threat of a future leader, a seed that must be crushed before it could take root. Bound in wooden stocks, his neck pressed against the biting wind, Temüjin tasted humiliation and helplessness once more. The tribe mocked him, their laughter echoing through the dark nights, their fires flickering like distant stars he could never reach. But beneath that quiet, he waited what? He learned the patterns of his captors, the rhythm of their guards, the way opportunity whispered before it appeared. One night, when the sky was heavy with clouds and the air smelled of coming rain, Temüjin made his move. A sympathetic guard, some say, a man who saw something fierce in the boy's eyes loosened his restraints. Others believe Temüjin freed himself, snapping the wooden collar on a jagged rock. Whatever the truth, he ran. Through mud, through darkness, through the unending steppe, he ran until his lungs burned and his feet bled. The forest swallowed him whole, its silence broken only by his ragged breath. He hid there for days, living off dew and desperation, until finally he reached the camp of the Boyorku clan, one of the few who remembered his father's name with respect. They took him in, fed him, gave him shelter, and for the first time since exile, Temüjin found something like loyalty. This escape was more than survival, it was transformation. He had tasted captivity, and it left a scar that would shape his soul forever. Some scholars suggest this was the moment he began to understand the value of allegiance and the cost of betrayal. Every chain that had held him became a lesson in control both of himself and of others. The boy who escaped in the night would one day command millions, and each of those warriors would be bound by the same iron principle that had once bound him: obedience, discipline, unity. As he looked back over the steppe from his place of safety, he realized that freedom was never given, it was taken. And Temüjin would spend the rest of his life taking it. After his escape, Temüjin knew that survival alone would not be enough. He needed allies, men bound not by blood, but by trust and purpose. The first of these was Boyorku, the man who helped him during his flight from the Temüjin. Boyorku became his brother in arms, the embodiment of the loyalty Temüjin valued above all else. Together, they began to rebuild the fragments of Temüjin's past, reaching out to those who still remembered his father, Yasuge. Among the vast, unending plains, Temüjin began to gather a small band of followers, men who had no tribe, no power, only the will to survive. They shared food, hardship, and a dream whispered around campfires, the dream of unity in a land where betrayal was more common than rain. He was still young, but his presence was magnetic, his words quiet yet burning with conviction. He spoke of fairness, of loyalty rewarded, of strength that came not from fear, but from faith in one another. It was revolutionary for its time. The Mongol clans were fractured, driven by blood feuds and greed. But Temüjin saw the possibility of something greater, single people under a single banner. Among his closest allies was a young warrior named Jamuka, his childhood friend, his sworn brother. Together they made an oath of Andabon stronger than family. They promised to stand side by side, to rule together, to bring peace to the steppe. For a time they did. Their combined strength drew followers from distant clans, warriors who admired their unity and the order they brought to chaos. But power has a way of testing even the purest bonds. Jamukha believed in the old ways of noble blood and hierarchy. Temüjin believed that leadership should be earned through loyalty and merit. Their philosophies clashed like thunder over the plains. Some say the seeds of their rivalry were planted in those early years, hidden beneath the warmth of friendship. Others claim that destiny itself demanded they become enemies. Still, in those quiet nights, beneath the boundless sky, when the wind swept over the grass like a whispering tide, they dreamed of a new world together, a Mongol nation unbroken and unstoppable. But dreams are fragile things on the steppe, and soon the first cracks began to form. For a time, Temüjin and Jamukha's bond seemed unbreakable. Together they rode across the endless plains, their banners snapping in the wind, their warriors united under a shared vision of strength. They fought side by side, conquered rival clans, and whispered plans of a Mongol world united beneath one rule. The steppe trembled with the sound of their horses, and their enemies began to whisper their names like omens carried by the wind. Yet beneath the surface, a quiet tension grew, a shadow cast by two different ideas of what power should mean. Jamukha was a noble by birth, proud, commanding, and bound to the traditions of the steppe aristocracy. He ruled through fear and privilege, rewarding kin over skill, maintaining the old order of lords and servants. Temüjin, on the other hand, was born of exile, betrayal, and hunger. He saw leadership as something earned through loyalty, discipline, and the ability to protect those who served you. Where Jamukha demanded obedience, Temüjin inspired it. Where Jamukha spoke of bloodlines, Temüjin spoke of unity. The difference was subtle, at first a disagreement, a silence, a glance held too long, but soon it grew into something deeper, inevitable. Some say the break began when Jamukha accused Temüjin of stealing his followers. Men who left noble birth behind to serve under Temüjin's vision of fairness. Others believe it began when Temüjin refused to participate in Jamukha's cruel punishments. His public flaying of captured enemies a sign that their hearts no longer beat in rhythm. Whatever the reason, the steppe once again divided itself, and the oath of brotherhood shattered like ice beneath the spring sun. The two men who once called each other Andersworn brothers became rivals, then enemies, their armies drawn against one another across the same plains they once shared. Jamukha's forces outnumbered Temüjin's, yet Temüjin's men fought with discipline and belief, bound not by fear but by purpose. In the first great battle between them, Jamukha's cruelty prevailed. Temüjin's followers were captured, boiled alive as a warning to others. The smell of death carried for miles, a grim reminder of what disloyalty cost. But Temüjin survived, and in that survival burned something eternal. The betrayal of a brother would haunt him forever, carving into his heart the truth that unity could not coexist with weakness. The steppe had chosen its storm, and its storm was just beginning. In the years that followed his defeat by Temüjin disappeared into the vast wilderness of the Mongolian steppe, wounded wolf retreating into the shadows to heal. Yet even in exile, his presence lingered like a ghost over the plains. While Jamukha reveled in his victories, Temüjin rebuilt quietly, patiently, piece by piece. He began to gather the broken, the exiled, the forgotten, the men and families discarded by tribal politics and crushed by noble bloodlines. He offered them something the steppe had never known before: order. No favoritism, no noble privilege, no arbitrary cruelty. Under Temüjin's rule, every man had a place, and every place had a purpose. Discipline replaced chaos. Loyalty replaced fear. His camp became a sanctuary for those weary of endless clan wars. He reorganized his growing following into units called Arbon. Groups of 10 who lived, ate, and fought together, brothers forged not by blood, but by trust. Each man was responsible for the others, a living network of survival. Above them stood the Zuin, the Mingan, and the Tumen, larger divisions that could move like a single organism across the plains. The Mongols were no longer a loose band of tribes. They were becoming an army. Temüjin also introduced something unheard of among the steppe people. A poor herder could rise to command 1,000 if he proved his worth. This radical idea drew warriors from all corners of the land, men who saw in Temüjin not just a leader, but a symbol of fairness in a world built on betrayal. Meanwhile, Jamuka's power began to decay, poisoned by his own arrogance and cruelty. His noble allies turned on him, weary of his tyranny, and one by one they defected to Temüjin's cause. It was as though the steppe itself had shifted its allegiance, drawn to the wolf who refused to die. Some historians say it was here, in the late 1180s, that Temüjin's destiny began to truly awaken. He was no longer a boy seeking revenge, no longer a fugitive. He was becoming something larger, something elemental, a force that would bend the tribes to his will. The winds of the plains began to whisper a new name: Genghis, the oceanic, the universal. And from that whisper, the world would soon tremble by the turn of the 13th century. The Mongolian steppe was a cauldron of ambition, treachery, and blood. Yet, amid that chaos, a single banner began to rise above all others: the banner of Temüjin. His army, now disciplined and relentless, moved like a storm across the plains, dismantling the old tribal order one victory at a time. Clans that had once been rivals for generations now bowed to him, not through fear alone, but through respect for his vision. He demanded loyalty not to a tribe, but to an ideal: the unity of all Mongols under one rule. It was a concept so radical, so absolute, that even his enemies could not deny its power. Those who resisted him were crushed swiftly, yet those who submitted were treated with fairness, even honor. His code of law, the Yasa, began to take shape: rules that emphasized discipline, justice, and obedience. Stealing horses, betraying allies, or lying in council were punishable by death. But those who served faithfully were rewarded with protection, wealth, and status. For the first time in the steppe's long history, order triumphed over chaos. The tribes of the Taiket, the Merket, the Naiman, and the Tatars, ancient enemies, were brought to heel. Some through negotiation, others through fire and steel. The Tatars, in particular, bore the full weight of Temüjin's vengeance, for it was they who had once poisoned his father. When they fell, their defeat was absolute. The name of Temüjin began to spread beyond the steppe, carried by merchants, travelers, and fleeing nobles. To some, he was a liberator. To others, a monster cloaked in human form. Yet what made him feared was not his cruelty, was his precision. His ability to see the battlefield as a living thing, to predict the thoughts of his enemies before they acted. By 1206, the steppe was silent. The fires of rebellion had been extinguished. And before a great gathering of Mongol chieftains on the Anan River, Temüjin was declared Genghis Khan, universal ruler. The moment was both simple and cosmic, the birth of an empire in the flicker of a torchlight. Those who knelt before him did not yet realize that the man they called Khan would soon stretch his hand across the world itself. The tribes were one, but unity was only the beginning. The year was 1206, and the Mongol steppe stood united for the first time in its turbulent history. Before the gathered tribes, Temüjin was proclaimed Genghis Khan, title whose meaning, universal ruler, seemed almost prophetic. The winds howled across the Anan River that day as if the earth itself was taking an oath alongside him. Yet the newly crowned Khan did not pause to celebrate. His gaze turned outward. He saw in the horizon not boundaries, but possibilities. The tribes had been forged into an army unlike any other living machine of precision, discipline, and loyalty. Each soldier carried a bow that could pierce armor at 200 yards, a horse that could ride for days without rest, and a will hardened by generations of survival. The Mongol warrior was both predator and ghost, striking swiftly, vanishing into the endless grasslands, reappearing where least expected. But Genghis Khan understood that empire could not rest on strength alone. It needed order. He organized his dominion into a network of military and social units, ensuring no clan could rise against another. He implemented the Yasar code that governed every aspect of life, from theft and adultery to military discipline and the treatment of prisoners. Justice under Genghis was swift, sometimes brutal, but always consistent. He abolished aristocratic privileges, elevating men of talent over those of noble birth, binding loyalty not through fear, but through opportunity. Merchants were protected, messengers granted safe passage, and even rival faiths were tolerated so long as they swore allegiance to his authority. The steppe, once a realm of endless blood feuds, began to hum with the rhythm of unity and purpose. Yet, for Genghis, unity was never the destination, it was the foundation. Beyond the horizon lay kingdoms that sneered at the nomads, empires rich with silk, gold, and arrogance. To the south stretched the Jin dynasty of northern China, powerful and decadent. To the west lay the vast Khwarezmian Empire, its cities glittering like jewels in the desert. Genghis saw in them both opportunity and challenger, chance to test the strength of his creation. Some chroniclers say he looked at the stars that night and whispered, "The world is too small for two suns." The Khan of the steppes was no longer content with survival. He would reshape the world itself. To the south of the Mongol steppe stretched the mighty Jin dynasty, a vast and glittering empire that believed itself untouchable. Its cities rose behind colossal walls, its people dressed in silk, its rulers confident that the nomads of the north would never breach their borders. Yet they underestimated the mind that guided the Mongol horde. Genghis Khan understood the conquest was not about brute strength, but about precision, patience, and the element of fear. Around 1211, he led his army southward, crossing the Gobi Desert with a force unlike any the Jin had ever seen. The Mongols moved like smoke silent, fast, coordinated. Each rider carried multiple horses, allowing them to travel at impossible speeds. Scouts mapped every river and pass, while messengers raced ahead to sow terror and confusion. When the Jin armies finally met them in battle, they were overwhelmed not by numbers, but by strategy. Genghis feigned retreats, drew them out into open plains, and encircled them with devastating precision. The Mongols mastered psychological warfare as well as physical, spreading false rumors, burning villages to break morale, leaving survivors only to tell tales of horror. The Jin cities began to crumble one by one, their mighty fortifications useless against a force that refused to fight by the old rules. Genghis laid siege to the great city of Zhongdu, modern Beijing, its defenders numbering in the hundreds of thousands. For months the siege raged, the Mongols cutting off supplies, building siege engines from captured engineers, and waiting as famine and fear tore the city apart from within. When Zhongdu finally fell, it did not fall quietly. The streets ran red, the air thick with ash and smoke, the cries of a dying empire echoing through the wind. Yet even in victory, Genghis was not wasteful. He spared artisans, scholars, and craftsmen, sending them north to build his growing empire. He was no mere conqueror. He was a collector of knowledge and skill. The Jin dynasty, once the symbol of Chinese power, had been humbled by a man who came from nothing but the grass and the sky. And as the Mongol riders moved deeper into the south, Genghis looked westward again, toward new lands, new kingdoms, and new lessons in domination. The steppe had given him its strength now. The world itself would bow to it, as the smoke of the Jin cities faded behind him. Genghis Khan's attention turned toward the horizon of the unknown. The western lands whispered of in-merchants' tales, kingdoms of gold and faith stretching beyond the deserts. The Silk Road carried not only trade, but rumor. And from these whispers came the name of a powerful realm, the Khwarezmian Empire. Centered in Persia, it was vast, cultured, and proud, ruled by Shah Ala ad-Din Muhammad, a man who saw himself as the equal of any emperor. Genghis did not seek war, not yet. He sought partnership. He sent envoys across the sands bearing gifts, silk, gold, and the promise of peace through trade. His letters were respectful, his tone measured, offering the Shah the friendship of an empire rising in the east. But pride can be more dangerous than swords. The Shah, wary of these barbarian horsemen, saw insult where there was diplomacy. He feared the growing power of Genghis and distrusted his intentions. When the Mongol trade caravan reached the border city of Otrar, the governor accused them of spying. What followed was an act that would ignite one of the most brutal wars in history. The entire caravan was seized, its merchants executed, their goods confiscated. When Genghis heard of it, he did not rage immediately. Instead, he sent 3 envoys to demand justice, 1 Muslim and 2 Mongols, a gesture of respect and restraint. But the Shah answered with arrogance. He had 1 ambassador beheaded, and the others humiliated. It was a mistake that would erase his empire from the map. Genghis Khan swore vengeance, not as fury, but as a calculated act of retribution. "You have chosen war," he is said to have whispered, "and war is what I shall give you." Across the steppes, the Mongol war banners rose once more, dark against the endless sky. His armies gathered like storm clouds, swift, silent, and disciplined. Each division was assigned its task, each commander given precise orders. To the Shah, it must have seemed impossible that men from so far away could pose a true threat. But Genghis Khan was not coming for victory alone. He was coming to teach the world a lesson in consequence. The steppe had been insulted, and soon the sands of Central Asia would remember his wrath. The winds over Central Asia carried an unfamiliar stillness as Genghis Khan's army approached the fortified city of Otrar. Once a thriving hub of trade, its walls stood tall and proud, unaware that it had already been marked for obliteration. To the Mongols, Otrar was not merely a city, it was the spark that had mocked their honor. The birthplace of betrayal, and its destruction would serve as both vengeance and warning. The Khan did not rush into battle. He circled the city like a wolf, testing its prey. His generals Jeeb, Subutai, Joki, and Chagatai each commanded their divisions with precision, encircling the city in a living ring of horsemen. Siege engines were constructed from local timber, their massive forms rising like dark totems against the pale horizon. When the assault began, it came like a storm, unleashed. The hiss of arrows filled the air. The thunder of hooves shook the ground, and flaming projectiles arced over the walls, crashing into the wooden rooftops below. For 5 months, Otrar resisted. Its defenders fought with desperation, led by their governor Inalhuk, the man responsible for killing the Mongol envoys. But Genghis Khan was patient. His armies rotated shifts, ensuring exhaustion never touched them. They poisoned the city's wells, cut off all trade, and waited as hunger gnawed through Otrar's defenses. Eventually, betrayal cracked. The city's resolver gate was opened by a desperate faction seeking survival, and the Mongols flooded in like a tide. What followed was not a battle, but an erasure. The streets became rivers of fire, temples and markets collapsing into ash. Every man who had raised a weapon was executed. The artisans and scholars were separated and sent east to serve the Mongol state. Inalhuk himself was captured and brought before Genghis Khan. The governor was executed in a manner designed to mirror his greedsome, say molten silver was poured into his eyes and ears, a punishment as symbolic as it was cruel. When Otrar finally fell silent, Genghis ordered its ruins left as they were, untouched and unburied, a graveyard for arrogance. The city that had once defied him now existed only as wind-blown ruins on the desert's edge. And yet, for the Khan, this was only the beginning. Otrar was the first step in a campaign that would roll westward like a black wave toward Bukhara, Samarkand, and beyond. The lesson had been given. Now the retribution would continue. When the Mongol horde descended upon Bukhara, the jewel of Central Asia, it was as if the sky itself had darkened. The city, famed for its turquoise domes and towering minarets, stood as a beacon of Islamic learning and wealth, its streets alive with merchants, scholars, and worshippers. Yet beneath that splendor lay the same arrogance that had doomed Otrar, belief that its walls and faith could withstand the fury of men from the steppe. The Mongols came swiftly, their banners snapping in the wind, their siege engines rolling across the plains like moving fortresses. The defenders fought bravely but were overwhelmed by a force that moved with both precision and chaos, a paradox that no army in the world had yet learned to counter. When the walls finally fell, the gates splintering under the weight of Mongol battering rams, the city's fate was sealed. Genghis Khan entered Bukhara not as a mere conqueror but as a judge delivering sentence. He dismounted before the city's great mosque and, in a moment forever etched in memory, walked through its sacred halls, his boots echoing across the stone floor. He ordered the treasure hoarded within to be brought before him, then turned to the trembling imams and nobles who had gathered. "If you had not committed great sins," he said calmly, "God would not have sent a punishment like me upon you." His words fell heavier than any sword. What followed was methodical devastation. The soldiers looted the city with ruthless discipline, separating artisans and scholars for deportation, sparing only those whose skills could serve the empire. The rest faced a fate as inevitable as the sunset. Fire consumed what wealth could not be carried, and the smoke rose high into the morning sky, a black pillar visible for miles, signaling to every kingdom of the West that the steppe had awakened. Yet beneath the destruction was something colder, almost surgical. Genghis Khan did not destroy out of madness. He destroyed to build order. Each city that fell became a warning carved into the earth, a message written in ash: resist, and you will cease to exist. As the flames devoured Bukhara's domes, the Mongols moved on. Their horses, drinking from the city's canals, turned red with reflection. Ahead lay Samarkand, the beating heart of Khwarizm, unaware that its days too were numbered. Samarkand, the pride of Khwarizm, rose from the desert like a mirage of power and beauty. Its walls stretched high and strong, its towers gleaming beneath the sun, its markets filled with silk, gems, and the scents of distant lands. Here scholars debated beneath the shade of madrasas, and soldiers of the Shah stood confident, for they believed no army could breach their defences. Yet from the east came the sound of hooves, thousands of them of thunder that rolled like a coming storm. The Mongols had arrived, their ranks stretching farther than the eye could see, their banners black against the gold of the horizon. Unlike Bukhara, Samarkand was prepared, or so it thought. Its defenders numbered over 100,000, reinforced by war elephants and foreign mercenaries. But Genghis Khan did not rely on numbers. He relied on terror, deception, and the precision of his mind. He divided his army into coordinated waves, encircling the city so completely that even the birds seemed to avoid its air. Siege engines hurled flaming stones, archers rained death from afar, and every Mongol charge was timed with mathematical cruelty. Within days, the outer defences cracked. The Shah's generals began to argue, pride rotting their unity. Rumours spread that the Khan's men had infiltrated the city disguised as refugees. Panic took root. Gates meant to protect now trapped the defenders inside. When the Mongols breached the walls, chaos turned into annihilation. Samarkand's mighty war elephants, terrified by fire, trampled their own ranks before being cut down by arrows. Soldiers fled into the streets only to be cut apart by cavalry that moved like a living storm. The city's rulers were dragged before Genghis Khan, who watched with unflinching calm as the wealth of Samarkand was piled before him: gold, silk, manuscripts, relics of centuries. He spared the artisans and engineers, sending them east to strengthen his growing empire, while the rest of the population was executed or enslaved. By nightfall, Samarkand burned as Bukhara had burned, and its towers fell one by one, echoing the collapse of a civilization that had believed itself untouchable. The Shah, now stripped of his two greatest cities, fled across the Oxus River, pursued by an enemy that never tired, never forgave, and never forgot. The Mongols, relentless and silent, left behind not just ashes, but the ghost of an idea that no wall, no empire, no ruler could stand forever against the will of Genghis Khan. When the news of Samarkand's fall reached Muhammad II, Shah of Khwarizm, the illusion of his invincibility shattered like glass beneath a hammer. Once draped in the glory of empire, surrounded by advisers who whispered only what pleased him, he now stood alone against a force that moved with the inevitability of fate. His court fell into chaos, nobles fled with their treasures, governors abandoned their posts, and entire armies vanished into the deserts, unwilling to die for a ruler who had led them into ruin. The Shah fled westward, not as a conqueror but as a hunted man, his once magnificent banners replaced by dust and fear. The Mongols, led by Genghis Khan's generals Jib and Sabbatai, pursued him with a precision that bordered on the supernatural. They moved in arcs, cutting off every route, crossing mountains and rivers with inhuman endurance. Wherever the Shah went, reports of burning cities followed: Durginj, Merv, Nishapurul, consumed in a fire that devoured both flesh and legacy. He tried to rally his people, to muster the remnants of his armies, but none answered. They had seen the fate of those who resisted, and they chose survival over loyalty. As he fled across the arid plains of Khorasan, His retinue shrank day by day. The deserts offered no refuge, the mountains no mercy. The once proud ruler of millions was reduced to a fugitive, moving by night and hiding by day. He cursed his mother, Turken Cotton, whose arrogance had ignited the Mongols' wrath. But it was his own pride that had sealed their doom. Genghis Khan, thousands of miles away, needed no army at his side to defeat him now. Fear was doing the work. The Shah crossed the Caspian Sea to a desolate island, carrying with him the last tatters of royal dignity. There, surrounded by salt winds and silence, he succumbed to illness and despair, dying in obscurity with no priest, no heir beside him, and no empire left to bury him. His death marked more than the end of a man, it marked the death of a dynasty, of an age that believed power could exist without humility. In the east, Genghis Khan received word of the Shah's demise with no celebration, only quiet satisfaction. His vengeance was complete, yet his campaign was far from over. For in the ruins of Khwarezm, the Mongol Empire had found not an ending but a beginning, gateway to the conquest of the world. In the wake of the Shah's death, the Mongol army swept through the lands of Persia and Central Asia like a storm that had forgotten how to stop. The cities that once glittered along the Silk Road, jewels of art, science, and trade, now burned beneath a sky thick with smoke. Merv, once called the mother of the world, fell in a single day. Its walls, once thought impregnable, were breached by Mongol siege engines that hurled stones with a thunder that echoed across the plains. The defenders fought with desperation, but the outcome was already written. When the gates fell, every street turned red. Some chronicles say 700,000 died. Others whisper it was more. Numbers lose meaning when death becomes a landscape. At Nishapur, the city resisted fiercely, killing Takusha, Genghis Khan's beloved son. The Khan's response was absolute. He ordered its destruction, so thorough that no soul remained to tell the tale. The ground itself was said to have turned grey from ash and bone. To outsiders, it was cruelty beyond measure, but to the Mongols, it was order, justice. A lesson written in fire. Defiance would not be tolerated. Yet, within the horror lay something coldly calculated. The terror became a weapon, spreading ahead of the army like a shadow. Entire towns surrendered without a fight, preferring submission over extinction. Genghis Khan's genius was not merely in battle, but in understanding the psychology of fear. His warriors were disciplined, swift, and relentless, but they followed his laws. Looting was controlled, betrayal punished, promises kept when given. He was not chaos. He was a new kind of order, one built on absolute certainty. Those who obeyed lived. Those who resisted vanished. As his banners moved westward, carried by riders whose faces were masked with dust, the world began to change. The old empires, the Khwarezmians, the Persians, the fractured remnants of the Abbasid lands crumbled like sand before the wind. In the distance, across the Caucasus and the Volga, rumors spread that an army of ghosts was coming, that the sons of the steppe were not men but demons sent to cleanse the earth. Genghis Khan did not correct them, for fear, he knew, could cross mountains faster than any horse. And soon it would reach the very edges of Europe. By the early 1220s, the Mongol horde had reached a realm few had ever dared to cross the distant steppes and forests beyond the Caspian Sea, where the land curved toward Europe. The pursuit of the fleeing Khwarezmian princes had carried Genghis Khan's generals, Gib and Subutai, farther west than any Mongol had ever ridden. It was no longer revenge they sought, but discovery, a test of how far their empire's shadow could stretch. They moved like phantoms across impossible terrain, from the frozen peaks of the Caucasus to the black soil of the Rus plains. Along the way, they clashed with fierce mountain tribes, with Georgians, Alans, and Kipchaks, leaving behind the echoes of hooves and fire. Every battle was an experiment in terror and precision, a message sent ahead of Genghis Khan himself. No wall, no forest, no frontier could hold them back. When they reached the borders of Kiev and Rus, the Slavic princes scoffed at tales of Mongols. Who could believe that men from the east could ride so far, kill so quickly, and vanish like smoke? But soon, disbelief turned to panic. The Battle of the Kalka River in 1223 was a revelation written in blood. The Rus princes, confident in their numbers, marched to meet an enemy they thought primitive. Instead, they faced a storm. Jebe and Subotai feigned retreat, drawing the Rus deep into the open steppe. When the trap closed, it was merciless. The sky filled with arrows. The earth trembled beneath hooves. When it was over, entire armies were erased, their leaders crushed beneath wooden planks as Mongol soldiers feasted atop them. Ritual of humiliation for those who defied the Khan's will. Yet this invasion was not conquest, merely reconnaissance. Having tested the western lands, the generals turned back east, their saddlebags filled with maps, intelligence, and the scent of future wars. The Mongols had seen Europe's weakness, its complacent fortresses, its pride, and they remembered. When Genghis Khan heard their reports, he smiled not with satisfaction, but with anticipation. For the Mongols, the edge of the world was no boundary. It was an invitation. Beyond it lay endless grasslands, rivers, and kingdoms ripe for the taking. The empire was growing, not just in land, but in imagination, and its hunger would soon know no limits. While his armies thundered across continents, Genghis Khan began shaping something far greater than an empire of conquest, an empire of order. Beneath the endless sky of Mongolia, he summoned his generals, scholars, and shamans to create a code that would bind not only soldiers, but all people under his rule. This was the Yasa, the Great Law. Its words were not written on parchment, but carried in the minds of men, passed from mouth to mouth, carved into their obedience. It decreed that theft was punishable by death, that loyalty was sacred, and that betrayal, whether in battle or in family, was unforgivable. But it also contained strange, forward-thinking commands: freedom of religion, the protection of envoys, and the forbidding of noble privilege in favor of merit. For the Mongols, it was revolutionary. No longer would tribes live and die by the whims of chieftains. Now they lived by the will of a single lawgiver who stood above clan and blood. Genghis Khan knew that fear could conquer cities, but only order could keep them. In the cities that surrendered, he installed governors and administrators who were chosen for their skill, not their lineage. Merchants were protected, trade routes secured, and the Silk Road began to pulse again with caravans that crossed from China to the Caspian, unmolested and taxed fairly. He sent out riders to measure distances, mark rivers, and standardize weights. Communication flowed like a river through the empire relay stations. Horses and couriers could carry a message thousands of miles faster than any kingdom in the world. To those who saw only the burning cities, he was a destroyer. To those who lived within his peace, he was a builder. His law was absolute, but within it there was strange equality. Women held influence, soldiers rose through valor, and even a shepherd could become a general if his heart was steadfast. Yet, Beneath this vision, the darkness still lingered, the memory of slaughter, the silence of the conquered. Genghis Khan ruled as both creator and destroyer, understanding that empire was not made by mercy alone. He had given his people more than land. He had given them identity. But deep in his heart, he knew that the law he built was written in the same blood that had carried him from exile to emperor. And like all things born from war, it would demand its price in the solitude of his later years. Genghis Khan often rode alone across the high plains, where the horizons stretched so far that it felt like the edge of creation itself. To the Mongols, the sky was sacred, the eternal blue sky, Tengri, the unseen watcher of all things. It had guided Genghis from his first breath to his last conquest, whispering through the wind and storms, reminding him that no man, no matter how mighty, stood above its judgment. Beneath that vast dome, he contemplated what he had built, an empire that reached from the Yellow Sea to the Caspian, ruled by fear and faith, stitched together by speed, order, and iron discipline. Yet even for the great Khan, there were shadows that no power could scatter. His children had begun to quarrel, his generals grew ambitious, and the weight of what he had unleashed began to settle on him like dust after battle. He had united the tribes and reshaped the world, but unity, he knew, was fragile. It required constant vigilance. Some chroniclers say he grew quieter in his final years, turning his mind toward the mysteries of life and death, as if sensing that his time beneath the blue sky was drawing short. Others describe him as still restless, still burning with the need to ride, to conquer, to leave his name written upon the earth so deeply that time itself would struggle to erase it. The shamans who accompanied him on his final campaigns claimed he spoke often of omens of strange lights in the night, of dreams filled with wolves and rivers of blood. Whether these were visions or guilt, no one can say. But one thing is certain. Even as age crept upon him, the Khan never stopped moving. He led his armies once more, this time into the mysterious land of the Western Shah, determined to finish what he had begun years before. His soldiers followed without question, their faith in him unshaken. For he had become more than a man to them, he was destiny itself. And yet, somewhere on that campaign, amid the dust, wind, and thunder of hooves, the eternal blue sky made its final claim. Genghis Khan, conqueror of worlds, was mortal after all. The exact moment of Genghis Khan's death remains one of history's most carefully guarded secrets, wrapped in silence and myth. Some say he fell from his horse during the campaign against the Western Shah, mortally wounded but refusing to rest until victory was secured. Others whisper of illness brought on by exhaustion, or of treachery at the hands of a captive princess. The Mongols themselves spoke little of it, for his death was not merely the passing of a man, it was a wound in the world. Even as his strength faded, he ordered the annihilation of the Western Shah, ensuring that no trace of their defiance would remain. Villages vanished, libraries burned, temples crumbled to dust. Only when the campaign was finished did he allow himself to die. His soldiers wept openly, hardened men breaking under the weight of loss. For them, he had been more than emperor. He had been the pulse of the steppe, the father of a nation born from chaos. But the manner of his burial was as mysterious as his rise. According to legend, his body was carried back to Mongolia under cover of night. The escorting warriors killed everyone who saw the funeral procession, herders, travelers, even animals, so that the secret might remain pure. Some say thousands of horses were driven across the burial site to erase all traces of disturbance. Others claim a river was diverted to flow over his tomb, so that even the earth itself would conceal him. No monument was raised, no stone carved with his name. He had come from the steppe, and to the steppe he returned, becoming one with the winds and the whispering grasses. The eternal blue sky, under which he had lived and killed, became his only witness. When the news of his death finally reached his people, it was delivered not with panic, but with reverence. The Mongols did not believe he was gone. They believed he had ascended to join Tengri, watching over them from above, guiding their conquests beyond the horizon. And in the silence that followed his passing, his empire did not crumble. His sons and generals gathered, their eyes burning with the same fire that once lived in his. The great Khan was dead, but his vision, like the wind, could not be buried. After the death of Genghis Khan, the vast empire he had forged did not shatter, it expanded. His sons, each born of different mothers, but bound by the same ferocious legacy, divided the empire not to weaken it, but to extend its reach. Gedai, his third son, was chosen as Great Khan, a decision made by Genghis himself long before his death. Calm, measured, and less impulsive than his father, Gedai ruled from the great camp at Karakoram, a capital that rose from the steppe like a city of tents and stone. Under his command, the Mongol war machine roared back to life. The conquests in Persia were completed, the Jin dynasty in northern China was crushed, and the Mongol banners advanced deeper into Europe, guided by Subutai and Batakon, Genghis's grandson. In 1241, their armies thundered through Hungary and Poland, defeating every army that dared to stand before them. From the frozen forests of Russia to the fields of Moravia, Europe trembled as the riders of the East appeared like a curse from the horizon. Monasteries burned, kings fled, and entire villages vanished into legend. Chroniclers in Europe wrote of the Mongols as monsters, the scourge of God, they called them. Yet behind the terror lay precision. Every campaign followed Genghis's principles: swift intelligence, absolute discipline, and mercy only for those who submitted. The Mongols built bridges, restored trade routes, and established laws that connected cultures once divided by mountains and language. Under their reign, merchants from Venice could travel to China, guarded by the same soldiers who once razed cities to ash. The world grew smaller, more connected, though it bled to make it so. But even as the empire stretched across half the known world, its heart remained in Mongolia, where the eternal blue sky hung over the empty plains, watching silently. The sons of Genghis had inherited his might, but not his unity. Beneath the surface, ambition simmered. The brothers eyed one another's lands, each believing himself destined for greater power. Gedai drank heavily, and with each passing year, the balance their father had forged began to tremble. The storm he had unleashed was still growing, but now it had no master to guide it, and soon the winds would begin to turn inward. After Gedai's death in 1241, the empire that Genghis Khan had built from blood and vision began to shift beneath its own weight. The council of Mongol nobles, the Kurultai, gathered to choose the next great Khan. But the unity that once bound them was crumbling. The sons of Genghis, the grandsons, the widows all carried his ambition, but none carried his balance. Rival factions formed like cracks in ice. Batur Khan of the Golden Horde in the west refused to return from his campaigns in Europe to attend the council, while the descendants of Tolui, Genghis's youngest son, pushed their own claim. Politics replaced war as the new battlefield, and alliances were forged not through loyalty but through necessity. The empire's vastness, once its strength, now became its curse. From the forests of Siberia to the deserts of Iran, governors and generals ruled as kings in all but name. The Mongol heart still beat, but it beat in too many directions. When Gwayak, Geday's son, finally rose as Great Khan, his reign was short and fraught with tension. Bata distrusted him. The unity of the Ulus, the great Mongol nation, grew thin as silk stretched too far. Yet even amid these internal storms, the Mongols continued to move. They conquered Korea, launched attacks on the Song dynasty, and maintained the arteries of trade that stretched from China to the Mediterranean. Caravans carried silks, spices, and rumors, and for the first time in history, a traveler could cross the world under a single empire's protection. But peace under the Mongols was as fragile as the silence before thunder. When Gayok died unexpectedly, some said by poison, others by fate, the throne once again fell into dispute. It was then that Sorgatani Baitchi, the widow of Toliwi, and one of the most cunning minds of the steppe, maneuvered her sons into power. She taught them patience, diplomacy, and vision, the tools their grandfather had mastered. Through her guidance rose Genghis Khan, a leader who would restore the empire's unity, if only for a brief and blazing moment. Yet even as the family of Genghis struggled to rule the world, he had won. The old prophecy lingered in the wind, that no empire born of the steppe could ever outlive the sky that created it. And the sky, as always, was watching under Genghis Khan, the grandson of Genghis. The Mongol Empire reached the height of its power, single domain stretching from the shores of Korea to the plains of Hungary, from the frozen rivers of Siberia to the burning sands of Arabia. Never before had the world been so vast, yet so connected. Roads and way stations linked cities thousands of miles apart. Messages that once took years now traveled in weeks. The dream Genghis Khan had forged beneath the eternal blue sky had become reality, an empire without borders, where merchants, monks, and scholars crossed lands once divided by centuries of war. Yet even in its glory, the seeds of decline had already been sown. Genghis was a just and disciplined ruler, but his death during a campaign in China shattered what little unity remained. His brothers, Kublai and Arik Bako, turned against one another, each claiming the right to rule. What followed was not the clash of armies against foreign powers, but brother against brother, civil war that tore through the very heart of the empire. The steppe that had once given life to Genghis's vision now echoed with the cries of his descendants. Kublai triumphed, founding the Yuan dynasty in China, ruling from marble halls in Beijing instead of felt tents on the plains. The Great Khan had become an emperor of civilization, but in doing so, the steppe began to fade from the world's memory. To the west, the empire fractured into Khonets, the Golden Horde in Russia, the Ilkhanate in Persia, the Chagatai in Central Asia, each claiming to be the true heir of Genghis's legacy. For a time, his name still carried weight. Riders still invoked his laws. Warlords still claimed his blood. But the unity that had made the Mongols unstoppable was gone. What remained was the echo of a storm, a legend that refused to die. Centuries later, travelers still spoke of the man who came from the mountains, who built an empire from nothing, who changed the course of human history. His tomb was never found, his face never carved, but his presence lingered in the wind that swept across the plains of Mongolia. Beneath that same eternal blue sky, the grass still bends, the horses still run, and the earth still remembers. Genghis Khan had vanished, but his shadow remained stretching forever toward the horizon. Where history meets eternity, even after the empire's borders faded into dust. The legend of Genghis Khan refused to vanish. His name traveled like a whisper through time, crossing mountains and deserts, surviving the rise and fall of countless kingdoms. Some remembered him as a destroyer, a storm that swept away civilizations, leaving cities in ruins and rivers red with blood. Others saw him as a unifier, a visionary who connected East and West, who turned endless horizons into highways of trade, language, and culture. The truth, as always, lay somewhere between. Under the calm of the night sky, historians still debate the magnitude of his influence. They point to the Silk Roads, rebuilt under Mongol protection, where spices, silk, and ideas flowed like lifeblood between continents. They trace how innovations born in China, paper money, gunpowder, printing spread to Europe through the Pax Mongolica, transforming the world forever. But they also whisper of the cities that vanished, of the millions who perished beneath the thunder of hooves. Genghis Khan's legacy is not one of simple glory, it is a story of contrast, of civilization born from conquest, of creation emerging through destruction. Some researchers believe his rule ushered in the first true era of global exchange, a network so vast that no empire since has matched its reach. Others suggest his empire merely accelerated inevitable change, collapsing old orders to make way for new ones. Yet, as centuries passed, his bloodline persisted in unexpected ways. Genetic studies revealed a startling truth. Millions of men across Asia carry the markers of his lineage, silent proof of how deeply his presence shaped humanity itself. His descendants founded dynasties in Persia, India, and China, blending steppe traditions with the customs of the conquered, turning nomadic simplicity into imperial grandeur. The Mongol spirit adapted, evolved, and endured long after the last Khan's banner fell. Even now, in the windswept plains of Mongolia, his people still ride beneath the same eternal blue sky he once prayed to, their voices rising in songs that speak of loyalty, strength, and destiny. Perhaps that is the true immortality Genghis achieved, not through monuments or maps, but through memory. As we drift deeper into silence, one question remains: was his empire an inevitable moment in the evolution of mankind, or a divine interruption, a reminder of how fragile and how fierce human ambition can be beneath the endless sky? As centuries turned and empires crumbled, the shadow of Genghis Khan lingered like a half-remembered dream that refused to fade. His empire, though gone from maps, had permanently rewritten the structure of the world. Trade routes that once ran through his domain became the arteries of civilization, carrying not just goods, but languages, technologies, and beliefs. The Mongol postal system evolved into the foundations of international communication. Their military organization inspired armies for generations. Their tolerance of religions planted early seeds of global pluralism. Yet, the man behind it all remained shrouded in mystery. No one knows where his body rests. Some believe he was buried beneath the sacred soil of the Berchtesgaden mountain, sealed away by the loyal riders who killed all witnesses to the grave. Others whisper of hidden tombs filled with treasures and maps of lost conquests, guarded by the spirits of warriors who still ride beneath the moon. The legend says that even now, the earth above his resting place trembles softly when thunder rolls across the steppe. But perhaps Genghis did not wish to be found. Perhaps his greatest monument was the silence itself. The idea that greatness can exist without being seen. Historians note that when his empire fractured, it did not simply vanish, it scattered like seeds in the wind, sprouting in strange and distant lands. The Mughal emperors of India claimed descent from him, their marble palaces standing where yurts once stood. In Russia, echoes of Mongol rule shaped the rise of the Tsars and their centralized power. In China, the Yuan dynasty he founded left behind architecture, bureaucracy, and art that reshaped the empire forever. In this way, Genghis Khan transcended time, his presence lingering in cultures that no longer remembered his name. His story became a mirror, reflecting what each civilization feared, admired, or wished to become. Some saw him as divine punishment, others as the hand of fate reshaping the order of the world. But beneath the myths and histories, one truth remains. From nothing, he built everything. From hunger, he forged destiny. And though his empire turned to dust, the world that rose from its ashes still bears his imprint. Even the stars above Mongolia seem to shimmer a little brighter when his name is spoken, as if the heavens themselves remember the man who once dared to unite the earth.